Beneath the arid sands of Egypt, where ancient winds whisper through broken temples and forgotten tombs, a parchment once presumed vanished into history, stirred once more. Its words, long buried in the silence of centuries, would ignite a storm no less fierce than the deserts that had hidden it. The Gospel of Judas, a name cloaked in betrayal, reviled through generations, had returned, not as legend, but as ink on fragile, time-worn pages. The year was 2006 when the world first glimpsed the contents of this enigmatic manuscript. But its true story began far earlier, shrouded in shadows and secrecy. Before it could be studied or translated, it had to be found, smuggled, hidden, sold, and nearly lost again. Mishandled by treasure hunters and traffickers, exposed to moisture and decay, it came perilously close to disintegration. That it survived at all borders on miraculous. That it speaks in the voice of Judas Iscariot, long cast as the archetype of betrayal, has left theologians, historians, and the faithful grappling with unsettling questions. What if Judas was not a villain but a visionary? What if his act, rather than a sin, was a sacred duty? These are not idle provocations, but the heart of the gospel's bold and disquieting message. This gospel does not emerge from the familiar chorus of the New Testament. It sings in another register, one foreign to most, echoing with tones of secrecy, mysticism, and rebellion. The shock of its reappearance reverberated through sanctuaries and seminar halls alike. Was this the suppressed truth of early Christianity, or a heresy long ago silenced for good reason? The media heralded it as a lost treasure, a challenge to orthodoxy, a mystery that could reshape millennia of doctrine. But underneath the headlines lay something deeper, the very human impulse to seek and to suppress what does not conform. Its pages, written in Coptic and preserved in the form of a codex, carry not only words but wounds. Time has worn them down, yet they endure, fragmented but potent, ambiguous, yet undeniable. They offer not clarity but confrontation. For this is no comfortable scripture. It is a text that unsettles, disturbs, and provokes. As we begin to trace the path of this forbidden gospel from the sands of Egypt to the vaults of academia, from ancient ink to modern debate, one question guides our every step. What does the Gospel of Judas really say, and why has it remained hidden for so long? In the mid-1970s, somewhere along the arid stretch of central Egypt near the limestone cliffs of El Minya, a sealed container emerged from the dust of time. It was not discovered by archaeologists or scholars, but by local treasure hunters, men scouring the earth for relics they could sell, not truths they could preserve. They unearthed a stone box, unremarkable on the outside, but carrying within it a brittle leather-bound manuscript whose words had not been read for over 1,600 years. The manuscript was part of a papyrus codex, not a scroll, but a bound book, a form more advanced for its era and often associated with early Christian writings. This one would come to be known as Codex Chacos, a name it received much later, after passing through a web of clandestine transactions, decaying vaults, and fleeting hands. In its earliest moments of resurrection, it was simply a curiosity. Few suspected the fire it would ignite. From the beginning, its journey was fraught with peril. Smuggled out of Egypt and offered to antiquities dealers across Europe and North America, it languished in a Long Island bank vault for over a decade. Trapped in a climate that accelerated its deterioration, the once supple papyrus began to crumble into fragments. Pages stuck together, ink faded, and the edges of the codex disintegrated with every mishandling. This was not preservation. It was slow, silent destruction. It was only in the early 2000s that the manuscript found salvation. Enter the Maecenous Foundation for Ancient Art, which, recognizing the text's historical gravity, acquired the codex, and turned it over for scholarly restoration. The document was falling apart. Time, water, and neglect had nearly obliterated it. But even in ruin, it held immense value. Like a broken mosaic, each sliver had to be examined, each faded mark interpreted. It was the work of years. The language of the text, Sahidic Coptic, added further complexity. A late form of the ancient Egyptian tongue, Coptic is written using an alphabet derived from Greek, augmented by characters from Demotic Egyptian. It had once flourished in monastic communities and spiritual schools of early Christianity, especially among Gnostic circles, but was now known by only a small number of specialists. These scholars became the translators of a forgotten gospel, navigating lexical riddles and theological nuance. Reconstructing the manuscript was like piecing together a shattered mirror. Hundreds of fragments had to be identified, dried, flattened, and arranged, each one containing parts of sentences that, once aligned, formed not only syntax, but story. Radiocarbon dating placed the manuscript in the 3rd or 4th century, corroborating its ancient origin. Paleographic analysis, the study of handwriting styles, further supported its authenticity. But authenticity in ink does not guarantee clarity in message. The Gospel of Judas was not written to be plain. Its content, shrouded in paradox and allegory, offered a perspective that many found unsettling. Yet, it was only through this meticulous process of reconstruction that anyone could begin to hear its voice again. The manuscript, in the end, was not merely restored but resurrected. And as its words came back to life, so too did questions long buried by tradition. Who wrote it? Who preserved it? And why, in a time of competing gospels and fervent theological battles, was this one left to vanish? Before any of these questions could be answered, the text had to be read. But before it could be read, it had to be rebuilt, word by word, line by line, with reverence for the mystery it carried. The desert had spoken. Now the world would listen. For centuries, Judas Iscariot has stood as the embodiment of betrayal. His name alone evokes the clang of silver coins, the echo of a kiss in the darkness, the shuffling of soldiers in Gethsemane's quiet garden. In the canonical Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, he is the disciple who sells his teacher for 30 pieces of silver, consumed either by greed, demonic influence, or despair. His end is marked by guilt and self-destruction. His legacy, eternal infamy. Yet the Gospel of Judas does not mirror this tradition. It offers no remorseful traitor, no pitiful end. Instead, it presents a man shrouded in mystery, entrusted with knowledge no other disciple could comprehend. Here, Judas is not the one who fails Jesus. He is the one who understands him. He is not damned, he is chosen. In the fragmented but powerful verses of this gospel, Jesus is portrayed as laughing at the ignorance of his other disciples. They do not grasp the truth of his nature, nor the divine plan he embodies. Only Judas, Jesus says, is capable of receiving the highest mysteries. You will exceed all of them, Jesus tells him, for you will sacrifice the man that clothes me. It is a cryptic line, but one laden with theological dynamite. The phrase does not celebrate betrayal, but hints at a deeper cosmology, one in which Jesus' human form is merely a vessel, a temporary garment. In delivering Jesus to death, Judas does not destroy the Son of God, but helps release the divine from its mortal confinement. In this interpretation, Judas' act is not treason, but transcendence. It is fulfillment, not failure. This vision stands in stark contrast to the canonical texts. In Matthew chapter 26, verse 24, Jesus proclaims, "Woe to that man who betrays the Son of Man. It would be better for him if he had not been born." In John chapter 13, verse 27, Satan is said to enter Judas before he leaves to hand over Jesus. The tone is unequivocally damning, but the Gospel of Judas dares to see differently. It places Judas at the center of a divine orchestration, a spiritual drama beyond the grasp of flesh and blood. He becomes a tragic seer, burdened with knowledge and despised for the role he must play. He does not act out of hatred or greed, but because he was asked to do so by Jesus himself. The implications of this are immense. It reshapes not only our view of Judas, but of Jesus, discipleship, sacrifice, and salvation. If betrayal becomes obedience, then the very axis of Christian morality must be re-examined. What is sin if ordained? What is loyalty if it must defy appearances? Emotionally, the portrayal is deeply unsettling. Judas is isolated not because he is evil, but because he sees what others cannot. The loneliness of understanding becomes his cross. The Gospel's tone is not exonerating, but haunting. Judas is elevated, yet also exiled. This reinterpretation is not an attempt at historical revisionism, but a theological mirror held to early Christian tensions. It reflects a community wrestling with the problem of divine will and human agency, asking, could there be holiness in what the world calls betrayal? It is a question that lingers unanswered in the margins of this gospel. And in raising it, the Gospel of Judas does more than defend a man. It forces us to look again at everything we thought we knew. Beneath the words of the Gospel of Judas lies not merely an alternate history, but an alternate cosmos, a world shaped not by the single sovereign God of Christian orthodoxy, but by a constellation of divine forces, fragmented realities, and secret truths. It is here that the gospel departs most radically from familiar theology, plunging instead into the intricate metaphysics of Gnostic thought. At the heart of this vision is a stark dualism, a division between the material world, viewed as corrupt and illusory, and the spiritual realm, where true divinity dwells. This was not a new idea among certain early Christian sects. Gnosticism, a movement both diverse and elusive, taught that the physical universe was not the creation of the highest God, but of lower, flawed divine beings known as archons. These beings, powerful yet ignorant, fashioned the cosmos as a prison, a counterfeit kingdom of flesh and decay. In this framework, salvation is not achieved through faith alone, nor through ritual or obedience, but through gnosis, a direct, inward knowledge of one's divine origin. To know oneself is to awaken to the spark of light trapped within, to remember one's true home beyond the stars, and to transcend the dominion of the material. The Gospel of Judas unfolds within this cosmic map. It speaks of eons, eternal entities or dimensions that emanate from the divine fullness, the pleroma. It introduces realms invisible to human eyes, inhabited by spiritual beings of immense power and complexity. Jesus, in this gospel, belongs to that higher reality. He is not merely a teacher or a Messiah within the confines of Jewish prophecy. He is a revealer, a luminous envoy from a realm beyond creation itself. The other disciples, in contrast, remain tethered to the material world. They worship a false god, a demiurge, mistaking the creator of the body for the source of all life. They do not understand who Jesus truly is, nor what he comes to reveal. But Judas does. Jesus unveils to him the architecture of the heavens, the names of divine realms, and the secret genealogy of spirit. He lifts the veil, if only for a moment, showing Judas the pathway to escape the world of illusion. This unveiling is not casual. It is cryptic, filled with symbols and paradoxes, as if language itself strains to carry the weight of what must be said. The Gospel describes luminous clouds, immortal realms, and the house of Barbello, a divine mother figure in Gnostic cosmology. It speaks of chaos and stars, of the soul's journey and the prison of the flesh. To the modern reader, this may seem bewildering, abstract, even fantastical. But for the Gnostics, these metaphors were maps. They depicted the soul as exile from the divine source and the perilous journey back through layers of deception. To know this, to truly see, was the first step toward liberation. In this gospel, Jesus is not sacrificed for sin. He is not a lamb led to slaughter, but a guide who sheds his bodily form so that others might awaken. And Judas, in his act of betrayal, is not an agent of death but of revelation, the one disciple capable of hearing truths too terrible for others to bear. Thus, the Gospel of Judas does not merely retell history. It redefines reality. It places before us a cosmos where knowledge is the only light in a world designed to blind. It is a text not of comfort, but of confrontation, demanding that its reader ask whether the God they serve is the highest, and whether salvation lies not in allegiance, but in awakening. In the early centuries of Christianity, the faith was far from unified. It was a mosaic of competing voices, diverse communities, and theological currents flowing in every direction. There was no single canon, no definitive creed, no universally accepted gospel. In this turbulent sea of belief, texts like the Gospel of Judas found fertile ground and fierce opposition. The Gospel of Judas, with its Gnostic vision and its radical reimagining of discipleship, stood in direct contrast to the emerging structures of Orthodoxy. It did not support the authority of bishops. It did not affirm the God of Israel as the highest divine being. It did not call for allegiance to the church, but for escape from the illusion of the world itself. It was, in the eyes of the institutionalizing church, not a variant of truth, but a threat to its very foundation. By the late 2nd century, figures like Irenaeus of Lyon were rising in prominence. A theologian and bishop, Irenaeus became one of the first to articulate a comprehensive defense of what he called the rule of faith, a cohesive set of doctrines rooted in apostolic tradition. For him, unity was not merely ideal. It was imperative. The multitude of teachings circulating among Christian groups represented not diversity, but danger. In his work against heresies, Irenaeus cataloged and condemned various Gnostic sects, accusing them of distorting the teachings of Christ and misleading the faithful. Among the texts he denounced was a gospel that portrayed Judas as uniquely enlightened, a gospel that, he wrote, was produced by a group called the Cainites, who he claimed revered all those traditionally viewed as villains: Cain, Esau, Korah, and Judas Iscariot. Such a text, he argued, perverted the truth. It was not merely mistaken, but heretical, a counterfeit gospel crafted by those who had turned their backs on the apostolic witness. And with this judgment, the Gospel of Judas, along with many other Gnostic scriptures, was driven underground. But the suppression of these writings was not solely theological. It was political. As Christianity moved from a scattered movement to an institutional body, it began to align itself with structures of power. The church needed coherence, authority, and boundaries. It needed to say not only what was true, but what was false. The canon of Scripture began to crystallize, and with each decision, texts were either included as sacred or cast out as subversive. The Gospel of Judas failed every test of orthodoxy. It did not support the apostolic succession. It challenged the goodness of creation. It undermined the church's sacramental framework. And most dangerously, it called its readers to seek salvation not through community and confession, but through secret knowledge and inner awakening. In a world moving toward unity and imperial favor, such a gospel could not be tolerated. Its condemnation was swift, its disappearance nearly total. For centuries, it was known only through the scorn of its opponents, whispered in polemics, erased from liturgies, silenced in history. It became one of many voices lost in the shaping of what would become Christianity as we know it. But the rejection of the Gospel of Judas was not merely the exclusion of a text. It was the triumph of one vision of Christ over another, the elevation of faith over knowledge, of obedience over inquiry, of the visible church over the mystical path. In choosing which Gospels to keep and which to forget, the early church did not only define doctrine, it defined the very contours of Christian memory. When the Gospel of Judas was first unveiled to the public in April 2006, it was not met with silence, it was met with a roar. The National Geographic Society, in cooperation with scholars and conservators, presented the restored codex to the world with solemnity and intrigue. For the first time in modern history, readers could access a gospel that had been branded heretical over 17 centuries prior. But what emerged was not consensus, it was controversy. To some, the gospel was a revelation, a long-suppressed key to understanding the diversity of early Christianity. Elaine Pagels, a preeminent scholar of Gnosticism, called it a critical piece of the puzzle, illuminating the tensions that defined the faith's first centuries. She argued that the Gospel of Judas reveals how complex, contested, and deeply mystical the early Christian landscape truly was, far from the monolithic tradition often assumed. Similarly, Bart D. Ehrman, historian and textual critic, emphasized the text's value as a window into the mind of ancient believers who viewed Christ not through the lens of church doctrine, but through the metaphysics of cosmic dualism. He contended that even if the gospel was written well after the time of Jesus and Judas, its theological insights carried historical weight. It was not a hoax or forgery, but a reflection of a genuine and alternative Christian worldview. On the other side, voices of skepticism and condemnation rose swiftly. Father Thomas D. Williams, a Catholic theologian, warned that the text posed a real danger if misunderstood. To elevate Judas as a hero, he argued, was to undermine the moral and sacrificial core of Christian belief. The gospel, in his view, did not offer truth, but distortion, not enlightenment, but confusion. Others took issue not only with the content, but with its context. Some accused media outlets of sensationalism, of inflating the gospel's theological significance for commercial gain. Questions were raised about the dating the authorship and whether the text had truly been written by a Gnostic community connected to the early Christian movement, or whether it was the literary creation of later sectarians with a divergent agenda. There was also debate over the translation itself. Early interpretations of the key passage, where Jesus says to Judas, "You will exceed all of them," were challenged. Some scholars, such as April Decanic, argued that a more precise reading of the Coptic suggests Judas was not being praised, but cursed. According to her, the Gospel of Judas may be a critique, not a glorification, of Judas' role. These disagreements underscored a deeper tension. How does one read a text so alien in tone and theology, yet undeniably Christian in origin? Is it a sacred fragment that rehumanizes a vilified figure, or a theological aberration best left buried? The conversation spread beyond academia. Pastors, priests, and journalists engaged in the debate. Documentaries were aired, articles printed, forums filled with voices from every perspective. For believers, it was a moment of reckoning. For historians, a rare opportunity. For the wider public, it was the reanimation of a ghost, a gospel returned from silence, whispering questions that refused to be ignored. Whether seen as truth or blasphemy, the Gospel of Judas had achieved something powerful. It had made people look again at Scripture, at history, and at the fragile boundary between faith and heresy. Long after the scrolls are sealed and the doctrines codified, the story of Judas continues to haunt the margins of human memory. He lingers not only in Scripture, but in language, in art, in metaphor. To call someone a Judas is to evoke the archetype of betrayal, a betrayal so profound it cannot be undone. Yet with the re-emergence of the Gospel of Judas, that image begins to blur, and with it, the boundaries of our moral judgments. What happens when the villain becomes the visionary? When the one condemned by tradition is revealed, in another telling, to have acted not out of treachery but obedience, not out of cowardice but courage. The Gospel of Judas, beyond its theological novelty, forces a re-examination not just of doctrine, but of the way we assign blame and virtue. In many ways, Judas becomes a mirror, not of evil, but of us. Our readiness to label, to exile, to define a person by a single act reflects deeper tendencies within human nature. We crave resolution, clarity, a clean distinction between right and wrong. But what if those lines were never clean to begin with? What if moral clarity is often the product of selective storytelling? In this light, Judas is no longer only the betrayer of Jesus. He is the symbol of the outsider, the misunderstood, the one who carries guilt without the benefit of defense. His name becomes shorthand for treason, but the gospel that bears his name invites a counter-narrative, one in which intention, knowledge, and spiritual burden are held up against the harshness of history's judgment. This moral inversion echoes far beyond theology. It speaks to how societies punish dissent, how institutions protect their narratives, how history silences complexity in favor of coherence. Judas, Reimagined, becomes a lens through which we can question our own systems of justice. Is guilt always clear? Is loyalty always pure? Can destiny require a hand that appears unclean? The story also resonates with the psychological and emotional dimensions of betrayal. The pain of trust broken, of intimacy turned against itself, is universal. And yet, the Gospel of Judas suggests that even betrayal might carry a purpose unknown to those who suffer its sting. It suggests that sacrifice may wear the mask of sin, that the one who delivers death might also deliver meaning. Modern culture, too, has begun to revisit Judas with more nuance. In literature, film, and music, he is no longer merely the traitor. He is the tragic figure, the conflicted soul, the necessary actor in a divine drama he did not write. He is remorseful, resistant, sometimes even redemptive. These portrayals, shaped by shifting cultural ethics, reflect a world more willing to entertain ambiguity than the past allowed. In the end, the Gospel of Judas challenges not just theology, but anthropology. It forces us to ask what makes someone good or evil, faithful or false, hero or heretic. And it leaves no easy answers, only a figure standing at the edge of history, holding a truth no one wanted to hear. From the windswept sands of Egypt to the corridors of modern scholarship, the Gospel of Judas has traveled far, not only across time, but through layers of belief, identity, and memory. We began with a manuscript nearly lost to decay, hidden in the shadow markets of antiquities, miraculously rescued from the brink of oblivion. A codex, brittle and broken, yet still speaking. We traced the steps of those who risked everything to preserve it, who patiently pieced it together, fragment by fragment, syllable by syllable, until its voice emerged again. We heard that voice challenged centuries of tradition, portraying not a traitor, but a chosen one. Not a fall from grace, but a mission entrusted by the divine. As we moved deeper, we entered a cosmos unlike the one many know, a realm shaped by Gnostic thought, filled with eons and hidden knowledge, where salvation is not granted, but remembered. We witnessed the clash of visions in early Christianity, the fierce battle for doctrinal dominance, and the silencing of texts that dared to imagine differently. In modern times, we encountered the storm of response, voices reverent and voices resistant, each wrestling with the gospel's meaning, its origins, and its place within the vast and unfinished story of faith. Scholars and theologians, skeptics and seekers, all drawn into a conversation that refuses to be simple. And finally, we turned our gaze inward, to our own moral assumptions, our cultural symbols, our longing to judge and to understand. Judas, as portrayed in this gospel, does not ask to be forgiven or followed. He asks only to be seen again, not through the lens of inherited judgment, but with the eyes of thoughtful reflection. So what do we do with a gospel like this? We do not need to resolve it. We are not required to accept or reject it wholesale. Its purpose may not be to tell us what to believe, but to remind us how complex belief can be, how layered, how vulnerable, how human. The Gospel of Judas remains a mystery, and perhaps that is its greatest truth. If this journey has moved you, challenged you, or opened your heart to a new perspective on ancient faith, we invite you to become part of this ongoing conversation. Subscribe to our channel to explore more hidden histories and spiritual discoveries. Like this video if you found its story compelling. Leave a comment. Share your thoughts, your doubts, your questions. And most importantly, share this film with friends, family, and anyone seeking deeper understanding. Because the questions we ask together are often more powerful than the answers we find alone.